Do 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 do. Ah, a nice chair. Oh, I didn't see you there with this big camera on my face. But other than that, welcome. And today we're going to be reviewing The Last Guest. But before we do so, did you know that I have 0 subscribers? I know it's unfortunate. Look at me, just a no life, a nobody. And you know what? I feel like you, yeah, you could be my first subscriber. You know, the first of this channel. Okay, let's get back to the video. The Last Guest was made by Oblivious, is an hour and 30 minutes long, with the IMDb rating of 6.7, and I thought it was a pretty good story overall, with some flaws, but mostly pretty good. So let's go into my next room where I go rambling about this beautiful, beautiful story. Man, I'm just walking in. This looks nothing like the outside, but you know, we'll just go with that. I couldn't find a stock image for it, so don't judge me on that. First, we start off with the main character, the last guest, and his friend shooting at bacon soldiers, and his friend gets shot, then he kneels down, and is like, oh no! And then we go back earlier in his life when he's talking to his dad about all the guests disappearing, and how he's going to move to a new school. Then we transition to the new school, where he's scared about getting made fun of, and then he happily gets made fun of, and then his dad says this.
Be strong, little man.
Always be strong.
After school, they go to the playground, plays around a bit, and then it starts raining. And his parents then get shot by the leader of the Bacon Army, and they both die in the hospital later that day. And he gets sent to an orphanage. Wakes up in the orphanage where Daisy walks in his room, and they greet each other and become friends off of it. And then later that day, they go to the park where Daisy gets bullied, and the last guest tries to protect her. And then this happens.
Come on then, fight me, tough guy. You weak, pathetic guest. No wonder your species died out.
After Matt saves the last guest and Daisy from getting bullied any longer, they become friends and they walk back to the orphanage, and the leader of the Bacon Army is watching them. The Bacon soldiers decide to raid the orphanage, and then very intense music starts playing, and the leader happens to enter the same room that they are in. He checks the wrong cabinet and doesn't check anywhere else, and just walks out. It's so stupid. Like, why would he not check any other cabinet if he's really trying to kill these people? It makes zero sense to me. Later, it's the Roblox Army comes in and checks the whole place and talks to the last guest and say, hey, you can join the military. We probably need your help. Then transitions 10 years later, where the last guest and Daisy get married, start a family, move into a house, and then they check the news to see that Bacon soldiers have massacred guests, and he wants to join the army. And we have the scene in the bar where he's questioning to join the army or not, and Matt says that he will join him, which transitions to where they go into boot camp. He sees the bullies from earlier in his life, and he decides to fight them because they were being mean to him again, and destroys them both like this. Then they go through basic training, sent to the front lines, and are at the place from the start of the story. The last guest and the rest of the soldiers are behind a tank, and then the tank explodes, and I don't know how they survived the explosion. Probably still would have killed them, in my opinion. They start fighting the Bacon soldiers, and Matt starts giving up. And then the guest is like, yeah, we can do it. And he gets shot immediately afterwards. The guest goes in because he's like, oh, I'm so mad, and kills almost all of them while not getting shot, which makes zero sense to me personally, because, you know, there's people shooting. And, you know, I'm not gonna, I don't know. The fighting scenes are weird in this movie. I don't understand them. And after he kills like 10 Bacon soldiers, he gets shot in the leg by the leader of the Bacon Army, and he pulls out the gun and says, do you have any last words? And he does this.
Yeah! Go to hell!
After the explosion, it transitions to a military soldier walking up to Daisy and telling her that the guest has died, and they have a big memorial statue towards him, and they give a speech about him. And then Matt walks up and says that he believes that they could win the war because of what the last guest did. Everyone leaves except Daisy, Daisy's child, and Matt. Matt gives the child a note from the guest that he left before he went all in, and I don't know where he got the pencil and paper at. I guess he just had it on him because he knew apparently that he was going to go in and kill himself. Well, whatever. We go into a new perspective from Jeff's perspective, who is the son of the leader of the Bacon Soldiers 11 years earlier. Then we get a scene where Jez shows his mom a drawing, and then the general beats Jez and tries to make him a soldier and forces him to go train in the gym. And the next day, Jez's mother brings a friend named Zara, and they go to the forest to find that a dog's leg is injured, and they go back to Zara's father, who is a doctor, and Jez returns home and finds that his mom got murdered. And then we go back to present day, where Jez wakes up in class, and they talk about if his mom was actually killed by a guest or not. And Jez fully believes that his mother was killed by a guest, and Zara, however, does not believe that a guest killed Jez's mother. And then we go to the teacher talking about how guests did all these bad things to the Bacon people and made them suffer. Then we see the general walk in and say that the Bacon Empire has grown enough and this will be the last group before they fully take over. And on the side note, do you see how tall the general is? He's insanely tall compared to the professor. At first I was like, oh, maybe it's because, like, you know, they're teenagers and, you know, they haven't fully grown yet. But goodness, the general is massive compared to everyone else. He's just a beast. Okay, let's get back to the story. Okay, and the general wants them to go to the arena. They go to the arena, and he wants them to show their skills. And he decides, hey, who wants to go first? Jez decides to go first, and whoever gets first gets to sit next to the general in the guest game. And no surprising, Jez wins because he is the general's son and prepped him for this moment. But we still get some epic fighting scenes from him just knocking out everyone.
Done, my son. I had no doubt you would be victorious. You have earned your place next to me in the guest games.
After the fight scene, we go to the general and colonel talking about getting guest 1337, otherwise known as the last guest, or the guest 55, and they decided to go with guest 555 because last time the last guest dodged them in the orphanage. Then Jez walks in and the colonel starts complimenting him about how he'll one day help rule, and then he walks out afterwards after all the compliments and stuff, and here's Zara and Zara's father, the doctor, talking about getting food for all the guest prisoners, which he doesn't know now, but he'll see later. Jez then decides to follow Zara, what Zara doesn't know, and sees the guest prison where they keep all the guests for the guest games. And here's a little short clip of what they do in the prison. Afterwards, Zara meets with one of the prison guests and gives them some supplies and apologizes for what the Bacon people are doing to them. And then Jez walks up and says, hey, you're a traitor. And Jez still believes that the guest drove the Bacon people out of Roblox and killed his mother. And Zara's like, no, you've been fed lies your whole life. And the guests are good and we are bad. Then Jez is like, I'm gonna go tell my father. Ugh. And then Zara's like, yo, I'm your friend, and your mother was not killed by a guest. And then Jez runs to the colonel's office and finds the same knife that his mother was killed by. And the colonel and general are curious why he was there. And he's like, oh, I'm just excited for the guest game. And decides to get out of there. The next day in class, he talks to Zara and he says that he believes the colonel killed his mother, and then he is sent to the guest games to go watch. And the general believes that they are the superior race and has a whole speech about how they're going to take over, and then they start the guest games. And then this happens.
Very well then.
After a whole montage of the guests fighting each other, Jez has a change of heart and decides to be with the guests and talks about how his whole life he thought the guests were the bad people, but it was really the bacon people. Jez and Zara are at the forest, and Zara says that he is not like them, he actually cares about people. And after that, they decide to walk to the guest prison and get the supplies because the conditions are super bad there and they're not really treated correctly. And then a new guest walks over, her name is Rose, and they become friends with Rose. And whenever Jez is practicing in the gym, someone is watching over him, and then he disappears when he looks over. And whenever Zara and Jez come back to the prison, Rose comes up and says that she was selected for the guest games, and they have a plan to get her out and the rest of the guests. And then they set up the whole plan, and in the night, they go to the guard station, and Zara says that she needs to go and see, I guess, for medical attention. And then Jez knocks out one of the guards, and then knocks out all the other. One thing about the scene that I really have trouble with is one of the guards, he just doesn't care about his friend. I'm just guessing his brain stopped for like 10 seconds. And he's like, where did my friend go? And then he walks up to Zara and then he gets knocked out. It's like, what? It makes no sense how he just didn't see Jez knock the other guy out and then he got knocked out. It makes zero sense to me, but okay. After they knock out all the guards, they open the gate and none of the guests are there. Spooky Man Colonel is behind him, was like, oh no, with his soldiers, and then he says this.
Traitors.
Jez then cries over Zara's dead body, and then they lock him with the guests for the night. And he has flashbacks about when they're little, and he's talking with his mom as health, and then Zara pops up, and he starts talking with her a little bit. Then we go back to reality, where he is at the guest camp, and Rose comes up to him and just starts talking about how the colonel killed his mom, and now his best friend, and he's not gonna give up till he gets every guest out of his place, and then he falls asleep. Wakes up in the morning and is taken to the general's office. Just as that, the colonel killed his mother, but the general does not believe him, and the general wants his son to be on his side while they lead the army. And then we go back to the starting scene where the fight was going on, and we're on the bacon side now. Then we get to the point where Jez pulls out a gun on the colonel while he's on like the sideline, and then the colonel says this.
I didn't kill your mother. It was your father.
Which Jez is in shock and just cannot move, and one of the bacon soldiers knocks him out. And then the general points out that he sees the last guest and says, hey, don't shoot, which makes sense now, but it still doesn't make sense when the guys are still shooting. It doesn't add up to me, at least. We can just say that they're just really bad shots and to move on with our lives. Justin wakes up and beats all three of the guards around him. Jez runs a pretty far distance and then knocks over the last guest, saves him from the explosion while the general gets blown up, and then we go to the Roblox Army side. And one of the soldiers say to the general that the last guest blew up most of the army in this area, and then the general goes with a girl soldier known as Molly. They introduce her later, but I'm just going to say her name now so it's easier for me. And they drive over there to pick up Matt. While Molly goes back to the car, someone sneaks up behind the general and stabs him. And before he gets stabbed, there's a small little detail, like a shadow, which I thought was a pretty cool little detail. And then, while Molly is carrying Matt, the assassin runs at Molly, but she barely gets away and drives and saves Matt. Then we transition to Jez and the last guest, where Jez puts the last guest in the Jeep, and then we get the scene where the general's dying on the floor, and Jez says that he's done all those horrific things, and he will not help him. And then the general dies. Jez drives off to the hospital where the doctor takes care of him and saves his life. Then we go to the colonel's office, where one of the bacon soldiers say that the explosion killed the general, but they cannot find the last guest's body, so he gets really angry and then shoots the soldier in the head for some reason. I don't know why he would. I guess it's just out of anger. He's like, dang, I couldn't find him. The last guest wakes up, sees in the security camera that there's two people walking up, and then Jez and the doctor walk into the room. They don't see the guest, and then he pops up behind him, puts the scissors around his throat, and says, who are you? And then Jess is like, hey, we're friendly. And then he puts the scissors down, and they introduce themselves. and just tells about how his father was a man who killed so many guests and he was a horrible person. The doctor says that they are part of a resistance and they want all this racial stuff gone against the guests and the bacon soldiers. Jez says that since the general died, the colonel took over, who is even worse. And in the security camera, they see the colonel and the elite guards, which the colonel comes into the doctor's room and the elite security guards check everywhere else. The colonel walks in and they have a conversation about how his daughter died, and if the colonel sees him helping the guests, he'll be buried right next to his daughter, and the doctor has a bunker where he put Jez and the guests into, and that's where they're going to stay the night because they have nowhere else to go. And since people are searching for him, then we transition to the hospital where Matt is at and gets introduced to Molly, which is the girl soldier from earlier. And they speak about the guest family and how they came there and said that there's no chance that he survived the explosion, which we know he survived the explosion. And then we go back to Jez and the last guest and tells them about the guest prison camp. Later they decide to go to the prison camp and there's two guards near the little hole in the fence, which I still don't know why they haven't patched it up if they see it there, like there, but you know what, we're gonna go past that. They take out the two guards real easy, and then they meet Rose, and then we get a flashback of Rose when she was in her house and hearing of the guests being murdered, and then later that night, her parents talk about, hey, they should move, but her mom doesn't want to, but they still move anyway into a farm, and when Rose is reading a book, a bacon soldier comes up to her and tells her to not move. Then her dad pulls out a shotgun, and then her dad gets shot by the colonel. And then we go back to present day where Rose says the guest game is tomorrow, which she knows that there's an underground passageway. I'm too lazy to say what she exactly says, so here you go.
Taken through a steel doorway, the bacon soldiers lead us through the winding passageways. There are guards posted at different points along the tunnel. You'll need to figure out how to get past them. Eventually, we are led into a waiting area under the arena. We're kept there until the bacon soldiers call us through the gates to face our opponent.
After they go over the whole plan, the next day, they take out the first two guards at the entrance. Then they go through the passageway, take out all the other guards with some epic fighting scenes, you know, the normal Roblox fighting scenes. And then Jez and the last guest walk into the arena and see nobody's there. And then the colonel pops up and says that he knew all your plans because Rose was a snitch after all. She was just being a big snitch, which really surprised me. I didn't really expect it, and I was also curious how he knew what they're going to do. So it makes sense now. And then we have a flashback from Rose to when she was in the colonel's office, and the colonel wanted her to be the eyes and ears of the operation, and that's basically how he knew everything. And then whenever they're in the arena, the colonel wanted them to fight, and if they do not fight, he'll kill the last guest's wife and kid, and then he commands the elite guard to go and capture him. Then we go back to Matt and Daisy, and they have flashbacks when they're younger, and they were on the playground and how they used to play, and then they go head back to the hospital while the elite bodyguard is watching them. And Matt and Daisy, whenever they get to the hospital, they see the new captain and Molly and introduce themselves. The captain makes Matt the other lieutenant, and then Matt gets sent to the fracture clinic. We transition to Daisy and her daughter sitting in the waiting room, and then the elite bodyguard walks in. And I gotta say something real quick. Wouldn't someone in full black with a mask and is a bacon head walk in be very suspicious and they don't say anything about it? Okay, back to story. We then go to Matt's perspective when he's talking to the doctor, and his doctor says this.
Now, don't go getting yourself in any trouble over the next few days.
Matt walks out of the doctor's office, sees the elite bodyguard, and knocks him over. They have a fight sequence, and then Matt gets knocked down. Molly knocks the sword out of the elite bodyguard hand, and then saves Matt. Then she shoots two more times, misses, but the shooting effects are really weird, and let me just show you. After that, the elite bodyguard runs away, and they talk about how it'd be scary what he would do if they took Daisy away and the kid. Then the captain says that he'll make sure guards are around her house 24/7 and tells Matt he needs to meet at headquarters at 6 tomorrow. Then we go back to the arena, and Rose explains why she betrayed him. The reason she did it is that if Rose did not explain what they were going to do, then the Colonel would make sure Rose's mother would die very slowly and painfully. And since she cares about her mother, that's the reason she betrayed them. And the last guest is thinking of a way to get out since the guest games are in less than an hour, and Jez wants to give himself up since he does not have anything to go back to. Then the doctor walks in and says he needs to treat an unconscious bacon soldier. Then he puts the bacon soldier to sleep and calls the other two bacon soldiers, saying that his friend is unconscious, and then he puts the other two to sleep. And after he does that, he calls the bacon soldiers stupid, and the reason he knew what their plans were was because they told him in the morning, and releases them and goes back to the doctor's room. And a war alarm wakes them up. They decide to go to the prison since there likely will not be any guards there, and the same guards from earlier are guarding the prison now. Then the one with no brain walks up and says this.
Oh gosh, it's happening again.
Oh no, not you guys again!
After they open the gate, they look behind them and see bacon soldiers with the doctor, and turns out they are actually part of a resistance. They go inside the camp and say they need help to stop the bacon soldiers, and anyone who can fight, join them. Then we get a scene of both armies coming straight at each other, but why do most of them only have pistols instead of like rifles, grenades chucked at each other? I don't understand, but I guess it's for the honor. The last guest then pops up behind them and asks if they need any help, and shows a resistance. They meet each other at the middle and stop using weapons, then go to fist fighting each other with a pretty good fighting scene, I guess. Then we go over to where the last guest and Colonel are fighting. The Colonel pulls out a gun, shoots, but the last guest dodges like in the Matrix. Then he knocks the gun out of him, and then we go to where Matt and Molly are fighting the elite bodyguard. Jez is also fighting one, but it doesn't really matter. Then we go back to where the last guest and Colonel are fighting. He gets pushed down to the ground. Then Colonel grabs his gun. The Colonel shoots. It hits Rose and takes the bullet for the last guest. And then the Colonel tries to kill the last guest with another shot, but he runs out of bullets and runs away all the way up to the mountain. Jez kills the elite bodyguard. Matt and Molly then kill the other bodyguard. Then we meet up at the top of the mountain where the Colonel reloads the gun. Jez knocks him down. They get back up, have a tiny fight. Then the last guest knocks the gun down the mountain. And this fight and music is just so beautiful and synchronized together. Then Jez pulls out his gun, shoots the Colonel off the mountain. Why didn't he use the gun in the first place? But I guess it was just for action, cool points. Then we go back to the hospital and see Rose is still alive. Then has a conversation with Jez a little bit. And then we see a scene where the guest goes back to his house, sees his family, transitions a year later. Bacon people and guests are living together peacefully. Then we see Matt and Molly got married, had a baby. And you know what? That's the end. Okay, let's go into my next room. Welcome to my tier list room. I really like The Last Guest. It is my favorite Roblox movie of all time compared to the rest I've seen. I think it's just perfect. It's just life-changing. It really changed my attitude on life afterwards, and I can't thank The Last Guest enough. But for real, I'm giving it an S because it deserves it. And of course there was some bad parts, like the editing was off a little bit, the music wasn't the best, but it's a Roblox movie, what else can they do? The scenes were honestly pretty dang good. This is the reason I'm giving it an S, and come follow me into my next room for all the people that are here. Don't worry about me going behind the little couch here. Boom. Okay, if you guys like this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you guys for watching. Peace.